there exists a quiet kind of pain that nobody cautions you about, a type of discomfort that is not immediately apparent. This particular pain does not arrive accompanied by chaos or drama, but rather it arrives slowly, almost in a polite manner. One day, you find yourself looking around and realizing that the people who once felt like home to you now feel familiar yet distant, a feeling that is not a result of anything going wrong or a fight, but rather because something inside of you has undergone a transformation. And the most challenging part of this experience is the fact that you did not intentionally leave them behind. You simply kept growing and evolving as a person. Outgrowing people does not feel like a victory or a success. It feels like a betrayal, a feeling that is not often acknowledged or discussed, even when no one explicitly states it, because growth is supposed to be a celebrated and positive experience, right? That is what everyone tells you, to level up, move forward, and become more. But no one talks about the guilt that comes with becoming someone new while others remain the same. At first, it is subtle. You notice that conversations start to feel repetitive. The jokes do not land the way they used to, and the dreams you talk about are met with silence, polite nods, or quick subject changes. You start editing yourself, shrinking your thoughts, downplaying your progress, not because you are arrogant, but because you do not want to make anyone uncomfortable. And that is where the guilt begins. Because a part of you wonders if you are changing too much, if you are becoming someone they can no longer recognize, if you are leaving people behind just by moving forward. Here is the truth. Most people never say out loud that outgrowing others does not mean you think you are better than them. It means you are no longer the same version of yourself that fit comfortably into the old dynamic, and dynamics do not break loudly, they fade away. You used to bond over the same struggles, the same fears, the same frustrations, but now you are solving problems, they are still stuck inside, you are asking questions they are avoiding, you are choosing discomfort in a way they are not ready for, and suddenly you feel like the odd one out, even though you are the one who changed. So you start feeling responsible for the distance, responsible for the silence, responsible for the shift, but growth does not ask for permission, it just happens, and still the guilt stays, because when you grow, you do not just gain clarity, you gain awareness. You become aware of patterns you once tolerated. You notice emotional loops you once laughed off. You see behaviors you once normalized and can no longer ignore. And that awareness creates separation, not physically at first, but emotionally. You are still in the same room, but you are no longer in the same place. And the worst part is that you miss them. You miss who they were to you. You miss who you were with them. You miss the version of yourself that did not overthink every interaction, that did not feel guilty for dreaming bigger, that did not feel like growth came with loss. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Growth always costs something. Sometimes it costs comfort, sometimes it costs certainty, and sometimes it costs people. But society romanticizes growth. It shows the highlight reel, the success, the confidence, the glow up. It rarely shows the quiet nights where you wonder if you have become too different to belong anywhere. You start asking questions like, why do I feel lonely even when I am doing better? Why do I feel guilty for wanting more? Why does success sometimes feel heavier than failure? And the answer is not that you are ungrateful. It is that growth separates before it unites. When you outgrow others, you enter a strange emotional space. You are no longer who you were, but not fully surrounded by people who match who you are now. You are in the process of becoming something new, which is a natural part of life. So, you find yourself floating through various social situations, and this floating sensation can be quite lonely at times. You no longer fit seamlessly into your old conversations, yet you don't entirely feel at home in your new ones either. And because you are an empathetic person, because you genuinely care about others, and because you still remember where you came from, you cannot help but feel guilty about the distance that has formed between you and others, even when this distance was not something you intentionally created. But here is something crucial that you need to hear and understand. The act of outgrowing others is not something that should be viewed as cruel or heartless. Rather, it is a direct consequence of having self-respect and prioritizing your own personal growth. When you start choosing to be honest with yourself and others over seeking comfort, And when you prioritize growth and self-awareness over familiarity and avoidance, some relationships will inevitably struggle to keep up with you. This is not because the people in these relationships are bad or flawed in any way, but rather because the relationships themselves were built around a version of you that no longer exists. And coming to terms with this realization can be quite painful, because you do not want to cause any harm or hurt to those around you, and you did not wake up one day with the intention of leaving anyone behind. You simply stopped abandoning your own needs and desires, and this change has had a profound impact on everything. There is a reason why this guilt feels so heavy and overwhelming at times. It is because humans are wired to crave a sense of belonging and connection with others. For most of human history, being cast out or ostracized from a community meant facing real danger and struggling to survive. As a result, isolation was not just an emotional state, but a real threat to one's survival. So, when your personal growth and evolution start to threaten your connections with others, your nervous system interprets this as a loss, even if your mind knows that you are evolving and becoming a better version of yourself. Your body still feels like it is losing a sense of safety and security, which is why you often second-guess yourself and wonder if you should slow down or try to go back to the way things were before. That is why you sometimes consider shrinking back into your old self just to maintain peace and avoid conflict. But the peace that requires you to betray your own needs and desires is not true peace at all. It is merely a postponement of the inevitable, a temporary solution that will ultimately lead to more harm and resentment in the long run. And eventually, the cost of trying to maintain these relationships and this sense of peace becomes too high to bear. You start to feel drained and exhausted after conversations that once energized and inspired you. You feel misunderstood and unheard, even when people are listening to you and trying to understand your perspective. You feel like you are explaining yourself too much, or not at all, and this can be a very frustrating and isolating experience. And that is when the guilt transforms into grief, because you are not just losing people and relationships, but also grieving the shared futures and plans that will never come to pass. You are mourning the loss of inside jokes and dreams that no longer align, and this can be a very difficult and invisible form of grief to navigate. You are mourning something that is not tangible or visible, and this makes it even harder to explain and process, especially when nothing overtly bad or traumatic has happened. There has been no betrayal, no explosion, just a slow and gradual evolution, and yet the guilt still whispers in your ear, asking if you should not stay loyal, if you should not be more grateful, and if you should not try harder to keep things the same. But here is the quiet truth that most people learn too late in life. Staying the same and stagnant in order to protect others and maintain relationships will eventually turn into resentment, and resentment will slowly erode the love and connection that once existed. You start to show up less, listen less, and care less, not because you have stopped caring, but because you are tired of being somewhere you have already outgrown. And that version of you, the one that is still growing and evolving, deserves honesty and authenticity. Growth and evolution do not mean that you forget where you came from, but rather that you honor and respect your past while still moving forward and becoming the best version of yourself. And yes, some people will inevitably feel left behind, not because you have abandoned them, but because they have chosen familiarity and comfort over transformation and growth. That does not make them wrong. It simply means that your paths and journeys are different, and that is okay. The guilt you feel is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, but rather a sign that you are human, that you care deeply about others, and that you are emotionally aware. It means that you did not discard people casually, but rather that you are navigating a difficult and complex process of growth and evolution. But caring about others does not mean staying stuck in the past or in relationships that no longer serve you. And here is something that is rarely talked about but is nonetheless true. Sometimes people do not miss you. They miss the version of you that made them feel comfortable, the version that did not challenge them, the version that stayed predictable and stagnant. And when that version of you disappears, it creates discomfort, but discomfort is not harm, it is an invitation to grow and evolve. Some people will rise to meet this invitation, while others will not. And that is not your responsibility to control. The guilt of outgrowing others often comes from a place of love and empathy, but it is not a reason to stay stuck or stagnant. A false notion that your personal growth invalidates the growth of others is a common misconception. And however, growth is not a competitive endeavor. The evolution you undergo does not diminish the worth of anyone else. It merely reveals whether there is alignment or a lack thereof. And alignment is more significant than historical connections, because relying solely on history is insufficient to sustain a meaningful connection. Only a shared sense of direction can truly foster a lasting bond. You are capable of deeply loving certain individuals while still acknowledging that they may not be able to accompany you on your journey. You can honor the memories you have shared with them without forcing a future that no longer aligns with your personal growth. And you can experience feelings of guilt without allowing it to dictate the course of your life. Because if you compromise your own growth to ensure the comfort of others, you will not salvage the relationship, you will merely lose yourself in the process, and losing yourself is a far more substantial loss. In the next segment, we will delve into the ways to cope with this guilt, how to release it without becoming emotionally detached, how to grow without becoming disconnected, and how to let go without transforming growth into a state of loneliness. Because outgrowing others is not the culmination of a connection, it is the inception of a more genuine one, and this journey begins with yourself. And here's the aspect that no one truly prepares you for. Once you acknowledge that you have outgrown certain individuals, the guilt does not vanish overnight. Instead, it undergoes a transformation, and at first it is loud. It poses questions, and it keeps you awake at night. However, as time passes, it becomes quieter and more profound, and it resurfaces when you are thriving and suddenly think of someone who is no longer present in your life. It resurfaces when you find joy in something new and realize that the people from your past would not comprehend why it is significant to you now. And it resurfaces when you wish to share your accomplishments, but restrain yourself, not because you are ashamed, but because you do not want to create distance where there already exists a gap. This is the guilt that accompanies growth, not because a growth is inherently wrong, but because it alters the emotional landscape of your life. And the most perplexing aspect is that no one is to blame. There is no antagonist, no betrayal, no moment that you can pinpoint and say, that's when everything fell apart. Because things did not break. They shifted, and humans struggle more with shifts than they do with endings. Endings are clear, shifts are ambiguous. When a relationship comes to a clear end, the mind can categorize it, but when it gradually fades away, your heart continues to attempt to revive it. You replay conversations, you wonder if you should reach out more. You ask yourself if you are being distant or just different. And this internal conflict creates a quiet sense of exhaustion because part of you wants to honor the person you are becoming, while another part wants to protect the person you used to be with them. This is where many individuals become stuck. They attempt to carry both versions of themselves simultaneously. They show up halfway. They speak with caution. They avoid discussing topics that matter to them. They pretend they have not changed as much as they have, and over time, this dichotomy becomes painful. Because authenticity is not optional for emotional well-being, you can fake enthusiasm for only so long. You can conceal your growth for only so long. Eventually, something gives, and often what gives is your sense of peace. Here's something crucial to understand. Outgrowing others does not mean you cease to love them. It means the manner in which you love them must evolve. Love does not always entail physical proximity. It does not always mean daily presence. Sometimes love means acceptance without attachment, and that is one of the most challenging forms of love. Because attachment feels like proof, it feels like loyalty, it feels like safety. But attachment can also quietly demand that you remain small, not because others. It is intended, but because familiarity resists disruption, that you experience this feeling. As you grow, you inevitably disrupt, not in an aggressive manner, nor intentionally, but simply by becoming more honest about who you are, and this honesty, in turn, changes dynamics. Certain individuals will lean in, they will grow curious, they will ask questions, and they will evolve alongside you, while others will pull away, sometimes silently, not out of malice, but because growth confronts comfort, and comfort is a powerful force. So the guilt you feel is not because you have hurt anyone, but rather because you are confronting a truth that many people avoid. The truth being that not everyone who started with you can come with you, and this truth in turn feels lonely, even when it is necessary. However, here's where perspective matters, as you should think about how many versions of yourself you have already outgrown, including the child you once were, the beliefs you once held, and the fears you once obeyed, and you don't feel guilty for outgrowing those versions, but rather you feel grateful. Because growth requires leaving something behind, and relationships are no different, as they are living systems that either adapt or stay tied to a moment in time. When you outgrow others, it doesn't mean you are superior, it simply means your inner world has expanded. You have begun asking deeper questions, you have become more aware of patterns, and you have started aligning your actions with your values. And this expansion has created a gap that guilt tries to fill with responsibility. But you are not responsible for managing everyone else's comfort. You are responsible for living honestly, and honesty does not require cruelty, it requires clarity. Clarity sounds like this: I care about you even if we don't connect the same way anymore. I appreciate what we shared even if we're growing differently now. I'm not leaving, I'm evolving. And even if you never say those words out loud, you can live them quietly, by letting go of the urge to over-explain, by releasing the need to be understood by everyone, by allowing relationships to find their natural distance. And this is where guilt begins to soften, not because you stop caring, but because you stop blaming yourself for change. You realize something freeing: you didn't outgrow them overnight, and they didn't lose you suddenly. You grew slowly, they stayed where they were, and both can be true without either being wrong. What hurts most is not the growth itself, but rather the idea that growth has to mean loss. But it doesn't always. Sometimes it means transformation. Some relationships evolve into something quieter, less frequent, but still meaningful. Others fade completely, and that's painful, but not immoral, and some surprise you. They reconnect later when growth has reshaped both sides. Life is not linear. Distance now does not guarantee distance forever, but forcing closeness will guarantee resentment. So, if you're feeling guilty for outgrowing others, ask yourself this: am I honoring my growth or apologizing for it? Because growth doesn't need permission. And it certainly doesn't need constant justification. You don't owe stagnation to anyone, you owe honesty to yourself. There's another layer to this guilt that rarely gets addressed. Sometimes outgrowing others triggers a fear. What if I end up alone? When familiar relationships fade, the mind looks ahead and sees uncertainty, new connections aren't guaranteed, belonging feels fragile, so the guilt whispers. Maybe it's safer to go back, but safety without alignment is slow erosion. You might not notice it immediately, but over time, you begin to feel disconnected from your own life. You show up, but you're not present. You speak, but you're filtered. You smile, but something feels off. And that internal dissonance costs more than loneliness ever will, because loneliness, being temporary, is a possibility. The act of self-abandonment has a profound impact that leaves a lasting impression. The process of growth necessitates courage, not merely to undergo change, but also to tolerate the void that change creates. This void serves as the catalyst for the formation of new understanding, the emergence of new connections, and the appearance of novel versions of belonging. However, this only occurs if one refrains from hastening to fill the void with remnants of the past. The sensation of guilt that accompanies outgrowing others is not something that should be eradicated. Rather, it is something that warrants comprehension. This guilt is the residual emotional effect that arises when empathy and evolution collide. Furthermore, this is not a flaw, but rather evidence of profound depths. Instead of inquiring, "How can I cease to feel guilty?" it is more prudent to pose the following question: how can I cultivate growth while exercising compassion, without diminishing my own sense of self? The answer to this question lies in achieving a state of balance. This balance is attained by honoring the past without becoming overly attached to it. By appreciating individuals without forcing proximity, and by choosing growth without becoming emotionally distant, it is possible to wish people well from a distance. One can still retain fond memories of them, and it is possible to care for them without shouldering the burden of their needs. And this, in itself, does not constitute abandonment, but rather, it is a hallmark of maturity. The act of outgrowing others is not a testament to a lack of loyalty, but rather, it is an indication that one's inner world is evolving at a pace that surpasses that of their environment. And although this may evoke feelings of isolation, it also marks the beginning of a more profound alignment with individuals who perceive and accept you for who you are in the present moment, with conversations that challenge and stimulate you, and with connections that do not necessitate explanations of your personal growth. Therefore, if you are currently grappling with feelings of guilt, allow this realization to settle gently. You did not become distant in order to cause harm to others, but rather, you became honest with yourself. And this honesty warrants space and acknowledgement. The process of growth will inevitably alter the individuals who accompany you on your journey, but it will also bring you closer to your authentic self. And ultimately, this is not something to be ashamed of, but rather, it is something to be respected.